Okay, hello again. I wanted to make another video, but this time I was trying to figure out, okay, what do I want to make another video on? I could talk about my feelings again, which I probably will in the future, but I was like, you know what? I should make some sort of video essay. I don't know if it's going to be essay, because I have other schoolwork to do, so like maybe it'd just be easier for me to come and complain. So I wanted to talk about car dependency. Yay! Everybody who is bored by that topic, maybe you want to stick around, and everybody who is in my generation or not, that is like really like super like orange pilled, as they call it, because of Not Just Bikes. I love Not Just Bikes, even though I haven't watched their most recent stuff, honestly, because it's like 30 minutes long. So love them, and also Climate Town. But that kind of like got me started in this whole thing, because basically when I was a kid, I always thought, looking out when I was in the car, like in where I grew up, I was like, there just needs to be more development. There needs to be like more. And when I go to like rural places, I'm like, there's just not enough to do. We need more development. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I think I had a very naive way of looking at it. I think I had the same idea. Like the idea was always kind of like in my head of wanting walkability. But when I was younger, I didn't know actually what the solution would be. So I thought, okay, let's just build and build and build. But I think it's because the way our infrastructure has already been built is the problem. So right now I am at college, and I do not have a car where I go to school. And the area that I go to school in is very car dependent. And also where I grew up, two very different places, is also very car dependent. And you might ask, well, why didn't you want to go to a school where there is more of a college town where it is walkable? And my answer was, I also didn't really realize it at the time. So basically, I don't like the fact that a lot of places in America, you have to get to point A to point B via a car. And not only is it just a regular point A to point B, it is a necessity. It is from my home to my job, from my home to the hospital, from my home to school, from my home to the grocery store, from my home to whatever. And you could say, why don't you just go live in a city? That's what cities are for. But the thing is, there's a lot of problems with cities in general. I mean, it could be overall very high density. Sometimes you want to have more nature around you, and it can also be pollution and other things. So before all of this, before cars, essentially, there were villages. Yes, there were cities. There were metropolitan areas that had a lot more people, and there was a lot more hustle and bustle, and there was trade. But even in the places that wasn't the case, there were still villages where you would walk around and you'd go to like the local, I mean, I'm vegan, but the first thing that came to mind was the local butcher, or like the local whatever. There was farmers markets, there were apothecary, like there was a little hub that you could walk to from your little cottage, let's say. And yes, that was all built because it was a necessity. You needed to have a little town center for people living even in rural areas, because there needed to be some sort of exchange of goods. Now, there were people that just live remotely, and that's just what they live remotely and they do everything on their own. But I'm even just talking about small scale little towns. But the thing is, we don't even necessarily have that anymore, at least in America. Like I said, where I grew up, even though I grew up in a town, let's say, and it's not a city, it was suburban. And so you have your McMansion houses, and you have to get in your car and drive to school, drive to work. Then you get there and you have to drive back. And just the way that it makes the land look, the infrastructure just straight up looks ugly. And even here where I am, seeing all these highways and all these roads, it sounds radical, but I don't like it. It looks ugly. It just does not look good. And it bulldozes over the natural land that was existing there. And yes, there are nature preserves, and yes, there are walking trails, but there is something not gratifying. There is something kind of soul-sucking, draining of having to go in your car to get from point A to point B all the time. You're not actually exercising. It's just more gratifying to walk to the place that you need to go, like walking to the grocery store, walking to school, walking to work. Or, that brings up another point, public transportation. There's also not a lot of that where I grew up and where I am right now. A lot of these car companies, first off, intentionally wanted there to be car-dependent, car-based infrastructure so they would make money. You would essentially be forced to buy that hunk of metal that you drive around, thousands of dollars, pay the industry, and you would need to do that so you can have life, so you can function. It puts you in such a chokehold, for lack of better words. And there's also a reason why a lot of public transportation in America is also not really that good or subsidized or really valued. I mean, where I grew up, forget about it. I don't even, there were school buses, but that was about it. From what I remember, maybe there are bus stops that I don't know about. But there are bus stops here where I go to school. But I have not been on the public transportation system here, so I know that I might lack credibility in that aspect. But from what I have heard from other people is that it's really not reliable. And also just seeing from Google Maps to see, okay, if I used a car to get to this place, or if I use the bus to get to this place, the bus takes like an hour or two longer. It is so comically longer, slower than a car. So it just makes sense. It just makes having a car more practical. So it really sucks that these industries and the infrastructure that was kind of built around the pressure of these industries has kind of forced our hand into buying into it and to having a car. And this may be radical, but I don't want to have a car. I want to be able to walk or ride my bike or take the train or the bus places. I don't want to have to deal with getting into a car accident or just having a car payment or insurance. I also just don't like driving. It's not gratifying for me. And it just sucks that America has built most of its towns and cities around this. If we had a high-speed rail system, there's not even a high-speed rail system, I believe, anymore that goes from the northeast to the southeast, or from the northeast to the west, or just east to west, I should say. Let me say that again. There is no train connecting from the north to the south or east to the west of this country, or all in between. Maybe there's little metros here and there, but really, America has not been designed well, and it has been designed in the favor of cars. I would love if I could be able to go take the train up north or south or east or west. It would be so much more accessible for me. It can almost encourage more spontaneity, but it's also just, like I said, more accessible for people where maybe they wouldn't have to deal with the maintenance of their car from the point A to point B of their journey. Also, gas. Everybody was freaking out about gas. And I get it, because gas was inflating. But I didn't have a car, so I didn't have to worry about it. And I was thinking, if people didn't have cars, people wouldn't really be affected that much by gas. Maybe if there were train ticket prices or bus ticket prices, maybe it would go up a little bit, but it would not be as bad. But at the same time, it's not like many people have that choice that they can do that because of the way our infrastructure is laid out. And let me tell you, I just hate going out on the roads and the highways and just seeing it for miles and miles, and it just looks ugly of just you have these supremely wide roads, adding lanes and lanes and lanes. And does it really fix traffic? No, it doesn't. And it just looks bad. And yes, you can hypothetically walk sometimes with these sidewalks, but because they're so comically wide, it really makes the journey a lot more difficult. And they're not covered if it's really sunny or any kind of weather like that. It's not really viable to walk in because you're just exposed to the elements. And there's no tree cover and it's just asphalt on the road. Yeah, I just don't like how America forces your hand, and if you do not have a car, most often you cannot get places. And as a teenager, if you also don't have a car and you're growing up in the suburbs, you really don't go anywhere. Your parents drop you off places here and there, but you kind of lose a sense of independence as opposed to if you were able just to walk and meet up with your friends, or walk and go to the shopping center or something like that, or go to a park. There is a trail nearby my house, but it just doesn't make sense to walk or bike there. Because the way that it's set up, it would be too dangerous. The roads it's windy, and if I were to be on the road, I could easily probably get hit by a car. So it's really not advised anyway. It kind of forces you in your house. And I played a little bit of Stardew Valley, and I'm just looking at my map here. I would love something like a little Stardew Valley, like how I was mentioning earlier, those little towns before cars were invented that, had to exist for an exchange of goods and commerce, ideas, whatever, but you still had it was still in a largely rural area. And in Stardew Valley, it's like the perfect encapsulation of that, I would say. Even though it is fantasy, it is utterly fantasy, it still has this cute town center with an apothecary, plant shop, food, blacksmith, a saloon, a movie theater. There are things in the town that you can go to in the town center, and then you have your little farm, and there's all this nature surrounding it. And I feel like that it would be the perfect middle ground of having these little towns where you can walk around, but you're still surrounded by nature. And let's sprinkle some public transportation in there, and you can basically go wherever you want if you have the ticket for it. You could make a journey across country. You could make a journey to the next town, and that would be fine. Even though in my town we do have a train station, from where I live, you have to drive to it. And so it also, again, just makes it more limiting. I would love to just be able to waltz on the train and go into the city if I'd like. When I stayed in France, where I stayed was one of the universities in Paris, and right down the street from my dormitory was a metro stop. And that's what we would take nearly every day to get into town. And it would take about maybe 20 minutes. It was definitely not that bad. I think it probably would have been a little shorter if you took a car, but that's also more expensive. If you take an Uber or whatever, that also just not necessarily cost effective, and it's also not good for the environment. All of these cars individually emitting their own carbon dioxide or whatever gas that they're spewing is so not good for the environment, and it's so excessive. It's not needed. We could easily just cancel out all of this and much of it if many people maybe knew or were willing to take more public transportation options. But it's not even necessarily on the people. Yes, consumer side activism might be a good thing for yourself, where you individually do not have a car, or you individually believe in this, or you individually abstain from these products, things like that. But at the end of the day, if it's not a mass group banding together to do something, or if it's the industry that's making you think that as a consumer you can make change, when it's really the industry, like the auto industry or the oil industry, where they're just trying to say that so they can keep doing what they're doing because they know what you're doing is not really going to impact them that much. And so that's why we should do something to industries to stop raping and pillaging the planet. But also just impacting the way our landscape looks. It just looks bad. I know I've said this multiple times. It just looks bad. When I was in Paris, it was so cute seeing these. You had these little neighborhoods, and even though it was Paris, there were different parts and there were little different neighborhoods. And even though maybe it was because it was older that it was more charming, but there was just something better about it, about this. It was not super high density like in New York, because New York, so many skyscrapers, and you can't really see the sky, you can't really see the horizon. But in Paris, it was different because a lot of the buildings were shorter. And that's also because of the technology at the time when they were made. But there's something about it that makes it a lot more visually appealing, where it's a lot less car-based. The roads are short, or the roads are smaller. You can get from point A to point B with a bike or by foot or by the train. And you can see the sky and you can see nature, and all these buildings are not covering the sky like you're in basically a concrete jungle. So there's problems to both cities and just suburban, car dependent, whatever. Even cities in America can be car dependent, and it's like, this makes no sense. Or the suburbs surrounding, many suburbs surrounding these cities are very car dependent. So yeah, I think that was my long tangent. But I think at the end of the day that people need to first obviously make their own opinions and decide if you think you would want a car or not, or if you think that you would want to take public transportation or not, because that, obviously I'm not trying to push anything onto anybody. But in my opinion, I think a lot of this car-based infrastructure that we have in America and also Canada is really ugly. It just looks bad. It's not good, at least for my mental well-being, because it looks bad and it's not gratifying. It is hard for your wallet because you need to have a car to get from point A to point B. It is a necessity. And number 3, it is terrible for the environment. All of this greenhouse gas being spewed and all this production, also all of the metals being extracted, and all of the greenhouse gases that are produced in the production of the vehicle, as opposed to maybe doing that, a couple times for trains or buses that will be continually used for many different populations. And at the end of the day, it is not necessarily the consumer's fault. I believe a lot of it is businesses like the car business and oil business and things like that are really, they're promoting their products and they want you to use them, and they are buddy with the government. And that's why we have the layout we have, and that's why it's so difficult to not necessarily be car dependent. But, I will say a lot of this infrastructure was made in the 1950s after World War II. So a lot of oh my gosh, I didn't even get into it. Okay, hold on. Basically, after World War II, there was this boom of infrastructure and cars and the nuclear family and the American dream. And it was all going to be great. Everybody was going to have their little cookie cutter, single family home. There was a growth of the middle class. Everything was, wow, amazing. But the thing is, these pre-World War II towns, cities, homes, villages that were not even necessarily like a New York, even if they were little boroughs here and there, those are largely made illegal to build now in America, because we have zoning laws. And zoning laws, it's like commercial zoning, so that is businesses, and residential zoning, and that is houses and residential living and areas. And they are largely kept separate. There's something called mixed use, where there is residential and commercial mixed together. But a lot of the time there are minimum home sizes, minimum parking lot sizes. Have you seen the size of parking lots for like a Walmart or for a mall? I mean, it is just insane. And largely they are empty. And it's just sun beaming down on the asphalt, just wasted space. And not to mention catered to everybody having to get into their car to get to that space. So it's not even that, okay, maybe there's a group of people that want walkability. They want to be able to walk to work. They want to be able to walk to school. They want to be able to go back to a more village or borough lifestyle like they saw before World War II happened. But they have to fight tooth and nail to get it, because the way America has deemed the best zoning to be, with, you know, minimum parking lots, even for homes, it's very restrictive. And it doesn't allow us to go back to it, and it makes it look ugly. And I would argue it makes it look ugly because it's not made for us. It's made for cars. That's why a lot in Europe, they didn't necessarily have this, because a lot of their towns were made before 1950, before the automobile, even though the automobile was before 1950. And their zoning laws, I don't believe, are like what we have in America. Don't get me wrong, in Europe, there are car-dependent places, and it doesn't necessarily look good, but it's not the norm really for people to have cars. There is a robust system of trains and buses and international trains that go from one country to another, and they work together, and they're high speed, and they're more efficient and cheaper than taking a plane. So I would hope that the American dream, it can be up to anybody to interpret what that means. The American dream can be different for each person. But for me, I would like to have this sort of autonomy over my life, meaning that I don't want to have to be forced to buy a car to get to point A to point B. I don't necessarily want to have to live in a city, even though I very well might. I just want America to be more open to having these walkable places. And there are developers that are kind of going back to it, because I think people are realizing that it sucks and it's ugly. It looks bad. And I think people want to take value in their environment. They want to find beauty in their environment, and they don't want to have a car. They don't want to have a car to get to point A to point B. So that was a lot, but I think I'll leave it with, I'm not necessarily pro urbanization or urban sprawl or suburban sprawl, because that will be taking up more land than we already need. We should just design the space that we already are using better and make it human-based and human-centric, and not car-based and car-centric. Because that means it'll just expanding until there's no almost natural environment left, and it's all made, we think it's made for us, but it's really made for cars, and it just looks bad, and it is not good for the environment, and it's just not good for your soul, in my opinion. So I'll leave you with that. And if I annoyed anyone, or if you made this far, I guess I'm not sorry, because you made these are just my opinions. And I think that we have to stop with these stupid zoning laws, and we should make more walkable and bikeable and train accessible communities. Thank you.